Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we respond to viewers' questions on matters of history, political philosophy, governmental affairs, culture, all those things that go into the effort to create a decent common life together.
Right, so that means I can't ask my own question about when exactly Donald Trump is supposed to not be in the race anymore?
No, but you could fish for somebody to send it in.
Can somebody ask me that question? Because I would like to ask that question and not cheat by having it be my question, but your question instead. That's not cheating, right?
Not per se.
Okay. Here's a real question from Andre. He says, some countries have gone through a certain scrubbing of their history. For instance, Germany, after the Second World War, has gone through a Nazification of their history, as the Soviet Union is also going through things like similar to that. For instance, there's apparently right now big discussions about the role and the history of Joseph Stalin. There are other nations from the Soviet bloc, the former Soviet bloc nations, that also go through episodes, for instance, trying to outlawing the sickle and hammer and removing or relocating some Soviet era monuments. And he's asking, how healthy is this for a society? Either to try and suppress discussion of parts of their history that's not good, versus having this be out in the open and say, yeah, okay, Nazis, Hitler, we all know this was evil, but it's still there and we can't just ignore it.
I think there's a kind of Aristotelian golden mean here, that you need to face the past, but not get trapped in it. And that's not always easy to do. And I want to take an example from an open society. It came up recently in the United States that there was a memorial to World War II veterans in South Carolina that had whites listed in one place and colored in another. And there was a push to replace this with one that just listed everybody as equal. And when I looked at that, my thought was, by all means, put up the new monument, but leave the old one as a reminder of a problem in the past, lest we forget the quiet sufferings of those who were trapped by segregation. And I think that the same thing is true when you're looking at something like Germany. It's no good to get to 1946 and say, never mind that silly old Hitler. It wasn't us, it was some other Germany. And when you do that, to some extent, you're denying the existence in your own culture of dangerous forces that led you to do that. Because the United States can never forget that Washington and Jefferson were slave owners. But that doesn't mean that they didn't really believe in freedom. I'm a much bigger fan of Washington than I am of Jefferson. But it doesn't make everything either a deceit or a hopeless ruin. Now, for the Germans, it's somewhat harder, because Germany came together as a nation later than a number of the nations of Western Europe, and then it did embark on an effort to conquer Europe and the world. I mean, you just can't get around that. Both world wars were Germany's fault. And that means, although Germany was not a functioning democracy in most of that period, in the sense that we understand the term, but the governments were drawing upon things that did have legitimate popular appeal. You just can't wash that away. Now, sometimes there's another way in which people do this, and the Germans banned, Mein Kampf was illegal in Germany till quite recently, and you can't display certain Nazi emblems, not because they don't want to talk about it, but because they're afraid of a resurgence. And I think that's wrong too. I'm a big fan of John Stuart Mill's theory. He didn't call it the Dracula effect, but some people have, that sunlight destroys evil. That the best way to expose Nazi thinking is to debate Nazis in public and to expose the fatuities. And if you have trouble meeting their arguments, you better work on your arguments, not just drive theirs underground where they will fester unseen and give them the added argument, oh, look, they're afraid of us. And when it comes to the Soviet Union, what are Russians to do about this? Well, I don't want a big statue of Stalin in the town square, but I also don't want to forget that there once was a big statue of Stalin in the town square. You can't just put it aside as though it never happened. Nor is it safe. I mean, again, you look at Russia, the popularity of Vladimir Putin, the appeal of the strongman, and the disregard for his contempt for the law, for the brutality of his methods, for the assassination of opponents. Putin is not Stalin, but he is popular for some of the same reasons that Stalin really was popular. And if you forget the past, you're in danger of repeating it. So by all means, get it out in the open. I mean, there's a classic Soviet-era joke, a marvelous humor that flourishes under oppression, about an old man who'd been displaced by the siege of Leningrad during the Second World War. And so he's being interviewed by the authorities, and they say, where were you born? And he says, St. Petersburg. They say, where did you grow up? He says, Petrograd. Where did you live before the war? Leningrad. Where would you like to live now? St. Petersburg. Yeah, so rename it St. Petersburg, but don't forget that it was once Leningrad. You mustn't obliterate the past, either because you don't want to face the fact that there are dangerous currents of which you might be a part, or because you're trying to silence voices that you think are dangerous. In an open society, we take them on and we defeat them, and we understand our past so that we can fix the things that were wrong and keep the things that were right. And one more little digression here, perhaps, but environmentalism was powerful early in Germany. And environmentalism is good, but curiously enough, it fed into militarism, a rejection of decadent Western European culture or civilization in favor of German culture. So weirdly enough, the intolerant strain that often surfaces in environmentalism surfaced in Germany. The Germans need to understand all of that. If you obliterate the Nazi past and you forget how certain strands of environmentalism fed into it, then you're in danger of succumbing to a new form of environmental intolerance. So as Aristotle would say, don't flee the past, but don't embrace the unsavory elements either. Understand it, face it frankly, and move forward wiser because of it.
Well, that's harder.
Yeah, well, nobody said the job would be easy, did they?
Exactly. And that might explain why some people are tempted to just sweep it under the carpet, because it's harder to face it honestly.
Oh, sure. I mean, in Poland, the problem of complicity in the Holocaust, that ordinary Poles, even if they didn't know all the details, a lot of them didn't like Jews. And so you say, oh, we were invaded by the Nazis and they killed all the Jews. It wasn't that simple. And if you don't want to be anti-Semitic now, you can't just say we were never anti-Semitic if in fact you come out of a culture that had a strong strand of anti-Semitism. You can say, yes, that is who we were, and it's not who we want to be. As again, I say Americans have had to face this issue of race. And I think that people dramatically underestimate the progress the United States has made on race. A lot of people think it's 1968 out there or 1868. This is absolute nonsense. The racial problems in America are a lot different than they used to be. But you can't forget that segregated monument, and just demolishing it as though it had never happened is the wrong answer. Replace it with one that is what should have been erected in the first place, yes, but put the old one in a museum, or maybe even leave it behind the new one with an explanatory plaque saying this is what happened to these returning soldiers. Never again.
All right, then. Thank you for that. Folks, if you want to play along and ask a question of the professor, the URL on your screen will take you to a page where everything is explained. Thank you. See you next time.